Welcome to our comprehensive hands-on Kanban course. In this course, we will coach you on how to successfully apply Kanban and master it in your new or existing role. Going beyond just teaching you the basic elements of the Kanban, we will show you how to apply the Kanban method step by step in an enterprise environment like a professional. This method is used in the biggest enterprises and the newest startups for any digital product development, managing operations, or support of any digital work. Some corporations bring in highly paid consultants to lead their internal teams to improve their project execution or delivery performance in general. And most of the time, those consultants start by applying the principles and methods shown in this course. In this course, we focus more on the practical applications of those things and the implementation on how they are done. That way you have all the tools and details on how to do it yourself. In order to experience the real application of this method, we will be using a real enterprise project with real requirements. This will help you better understand the application of the Kanban method and how it is being used in an enterprise environment using Jira. This will ultimately give you all the techniques and information you need to implement the Kanban method in your own team from scratch. Every team needs a lead to help their team coordinate the delivery and process improvement during the execution of a project. In some teams, those might be called Agile leads, Agile coaches, Scrum masters, project coordinator, or project manager. With the step-by-step process provided in this course and the practical applications we'll cover, you can lead your own team using this Kanban method. How do I Kanban course approach? We will start with a brief history of Kanban. I know this might not be the most exciting part, but as you become the main person leading the implementation of Kanban in your team, you should know where Kanban originated and the basic history behind it. After that introduction, our course will be split in 3 parts. In the first part, we'll cover the Kanban method and show you how to implement Kanban in a hands-on approach using Jira. In the second part of this course, you will leverage what we learned about the Kanban method, and we will show you how to execute a new project or build a digital product just like they do in an enterprise. Lastly, with your new acquired knowledge, you'll have a proven approach on how to get recognized as an Agile delivery expert in your company. With that, let's get started. We will start with the Kanban history. The first Kanban system was developed by Toyota Automotive in Japan in the early 1940s. It was created as a simple planning system, the aim of which was to control and manage work and inventory at every stage of production optimally. It was also known as just-in-time production. This laid the foundation for modern management techniques known as Toyota Production System. In 2001, the Agile Manifesto was published in the USA, which set the stage for multiple Agile software development to get more traction, such as Scrum, Extreme Programming, and Lean software development. These Agile software development frameworks had a significant impact on what was about to become the Kanban method. In 2003 and 2004, Kanban gained more traction when Mary Poppendieck released her book on Lean software development, and David Anderson published his Kanban book on Agile management for software engineering. Kanban boards, combined with other Lean software development and Agile management methods, such as pull scheduling, limiting work to capacity, and measuring flow, gave rise to Kanban-style software development. Between 2004 and 2007, Microsoft and Yahoo were some of the first large enterprises that started to introduce principles of Kanban into software development methods and applied them successfully to multiple projects, and it became mainstream from there. In 2009 to 2010, Kanban gained even more momentum by the release of 2 popular books. Corey Ladas published Scrumban, Essays on Kanban Systems for Lean Software Development, which was an attempt to mix Scrum, Lean, and Kanban. In 2010, David Anderson published Kanban Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Business. This is one of the most popular books that provides general guidance on the implementation and use of Kanban. So now that we touched on the history of Kanban, let's take a look at what is Kanban. Intro to Kanban. At its core, Kanban is a workflow management method that has become very popular lately in knowledge work like digital product development. Kanban is not a methodology or framework. It should be applied to an existing process or way of working, and it doesn't replace a methodology or framework. Usually it gets added to a way of working. Kanban is meant to improve what and how you already do things. The Kanban method follows a set of principles and practices for managing and improving the flow of work. It promotes gradual improvements to an organization's processes. Kanban is one of the least disruptive methods because it starts with what you know and with using the same roles and people already in your team. Let's take a quick look at the main Kanban principles before we deep dive into how to implement it in your team and organization. First is visualizing the flow. This involves breaking down the process into distinctive steps and tracking the flow of work going through them on a Kanban board. A simple version of a Kanban board looks something like this. Kanban boards act as a large graphical representation of project information that present the status of the current work to the entire team. We will deep dive into how to create your own visuals in the implementation part of the course. Second is limiting the work in progress. Kanban prioritizes flow of work. In order to accomplish this, we set limits to how many work items can be in progress at a time. It doesn't benefit anyone to have lots of work in progress, but not to accomplish anything at the end of the day. In knowledge work, the issue of context switching can reduce the effectiveness of workers. Third is measure and manage flow. You can't manage what you don't measure. The goal of managing the flow of work is to complete work as smoothly and predictably as possible, while maintaining a sustainable pace. We will cover more on measurement in our metrics section. Fourth, make process policies explicit. Kanban policies are internal agreements that define a set of guidelines that should be followed in the course of work by a team. They define how you will operate when executing work using Kanban. These are helpful to set a common understanding across all your team members, which will improve quality and increase efficiency. Some of these policies are things like filling the board with work items, definition of when a work activity is completed, and when the work item can move on the board from column to column, also called pull criteria. The rules of the work in progress limits, also called WIP limits. Policies for handling work items of different classes of service. We'll have more on all of these in the implementation session. Another principle is identifying process improvements by collaboration and experimentations. Process improvements are done by using feedback loops. In Kanban, the feedback loops are the active board using the metrics and daily check-ins with the team. Kanban is a method for continuous change, and we make those changes collaboratively using feedback and metrics. Disclaimer: parts of this course provide hands-on examples or approaches used in a corporate environment by a typical software development team. The examples and approaches are prescriptive by design. This is done so people that don't have hands-on experience in an enterprise environment can get insight on what to expect and how to apply the Kanban approach. This prescriptive approach is fairly commonly used. However, keep in mind the examples and detailed approach provided in this course is just one way of applying the Kanban method. There are slightly different variations on how to apply the Kanban method. This is just one of them. With that out of the way, let's start this course. Part 1. How to implement Kanban. We will start with identify what is upstream and downstream of your team, even though you should focus on visualizing the workflow of your own team. The purpose of identifying what is upstream and downstream of your team helps define the start and end point of your control. You need to clarify with your team what work is under your team's control before you can visualize and define your own Kanban workflow. My recommendation is you start first with a high-level visual of identifying all other teams, especially the ones upstream and downstream of your team. This part might be considered optional by some people, but I found this part to be very helpful for making sure everyone understands the teams that your team is dependent on and the other teams that might depend on you. Plus, documenting this part will come in handy when onboarding new team members. For the purpose of this course, we will be using the development of a new web e-commerce platform as an example. The team represents the core building team of the new web e-commerce platform. The other team upstream of the core team are the customer account management team. They manage the login and account management of our external users. Product inventory team. They manage the inventory platform and product APIs that communicates to our team how many products are in inventory at all times so our web front end can display the correct inventory. Payment processing team. Manages the payment service and payment APIs. Our platform calls the APIs of this service before our e-commerce platform can finish purchasing the customer order. These are just 3 examples of how other teams upstream of us can impact the core e-commerce team in terms of work flowing towards them. On the downstream side, there are usually other teams that depend on the work from the e-commerce team. In our example, we have data analytics team, marketing technology team, or other reporting, finance teams. These teams might depend on the data that comes out of our platform, like the orders completed or analytics data of our customers. My recommendation is to start first with checking around your organization if any existing documentation or organizational chart exists. Next, you want to bring your team together, and during a quick working session, document your own visual from the perspective of your team. You can highlight in a couple bullet points the scope of work that falls under your team's responsibility. Next, we will look at how to create your own Kanban workflow. Define and visualize the Kanban workflow for your team. Visualizing the workflow is one of the most important aspects of the Kanban method. A workflow is the sequence of characteristic steps that tasks or products go through from the start of work to the finish. That's because it allows the entire team to see where the work is in the process, who is working on it, and if any bottlenecks are occurring in the entire flow of work. All these things in one visual, the Kanban board. In Kanban, visualization of workflow means mapping distinctive steps of work into columns of a Kanban board and tracking work items as they move through them. Most teams already have an existing process, so start with capturing your team's high-level routine. While the team does a lot of type of work, the focus here is to capture the work that produces improvements to products and infrastructure. For example, a typical high-level routine for producing new products or improvements in the simplest form can look something like this. Take an item from the backlog, specify the work necessary to implement it, validate that it works properly, deliver it to customers or partners. With that said, this high-level routine, when applied for our e-commerce team, will result in a Kanban visual workflow that looks something like this. Most of these columns are self-explanatory, but let's review them really quick. The backlog is where all the requests first come in. The requests are captured in the backlog in the form of user stories. Teams that are located in the same office used to create these boards on a wall in physical form, and the user stories were created as cards, which in our visual is represented by the yellow cards on the screen. For this course, we will assume our team is remote, and we will be using an electronic digital board in Jira software. We will show you how to create your board in Jira in the next module. The Ready column represents the area of user stories that are ready for the team to work on. Usually, user stories in this column are already prioritized, reviewed, refined, and estimated by the team. The Development in Progress column is for any work that has been started by a team member and they are actively working on it. In our case, the developers. The Development Done column are user stories that have been completed by a developer and now are waiting to be tested by one of our testers or quality assurance engineers. Testing in Progress is used by our testers to show the user stories they are actively testing at that moment in time. Testing Done is for user stories that have been successfully passed testing by our testers and are now waiting review by our product lead from our internal team. Some teams go from the Testing in Progress column directly to the Done column. What I found in my experience is that by adding an additional step that includes our internal product lead to verify the user stories before we mark them as done improves quality. This also allows us as a team to find any issues or defects early in the development process, which improves delivery time in the long run and saves your company money. Review in Progress, as mentioned earlier, is used for user stories that are actively being reviewed by our product lead to make sure the work or functionality that was developed has been completed per the specifications provided in the beginning. In a way, they are acting as our user or consumer for which that work was done. Next, we will jump straight in Jira and show you how to create this workflow with all these columns. Create Jira Kanban board and workflow. As mentioned in our prior sections, visualizing the workflow is one of the most important aspects of the Kanban method. We will be working in the Jira software tool to create our Kanban board and workflow for our team. If you are already in an enterprise, you might have an existing Jira admin that will set up the Jira project and Kanban board for you. If that is not the case, you want to know how to set up your own Jira project and Kanban board. You can start with a free account by going to this link. Creating your project, pick the Kanban option and select the existing template. We will customize this template ourselves as part of this class. When asked for project type, you want to pick Company Managed, because it gives you access to all the custom configurations just like you would have it in an enterprise. Enter your project name and start your new Jira Kanban project. After your project is created, you should see your new Kanban board. Next, go to Board Settings from the top right and select the Column section from the left side. In this section, we will create our columns as discussed in the last session. We will not go into extensive details regarding Jira setup, but you should know the basics between the Jira Simplified Workflow and the Jira columns. The column describes the current state of an issue and is displayed on your main board. The Jira columns are mapped to a specific status. All the statuses available and the logic between them are under the Jira Simplified Workflow. The Jira Simplified Workflow is used to control the transition of issues from one status to another. The workflow of the project determines which statuses are available in that project. We will create our own custom workflow and columns to match our Kanban workflow discussed in our last session. Start by deleting the columns that are not needed and remove the statuses we will not be using. Since every column needs a status from the simplified workflow, we will create the statuses next. We want to have a status for each column so we have the ability to use custom metrics later on. We will dive into the metrics in a later session. There are multiple ways to do this. We will not be able to edit an active workflow, so we will want to create our own new workflow with our new statuses. Click on Workflow and click Add Workflow. We can choose the classic default workflow. In our case, it doesn't really matter since we will customize it anyway. We can remove all existing statuses. Once removed, we can click on Add Status and type in the names we mentioned in the last session. When creating them, make sure you check the box to allow all statuses to transition to this status. This will allow user stories to be moved between any status on the board. You can also move them around. Once you created all of them, you should have something like this. Make sure you go back to the workflow and click on Publish Draft. Otherwise, your workflow changes will stay as draft, and you will not see your statuses under the column section. After our statuses have been created, let's go back to our columns. Under the Column Management section, we will start creating our columns as we mentioned in the last session. You will notice all your statuses created earlier are showing up on the right side of the screen as unmapped. If your board starts with the Backlog column that has a backlog status mapped to it as we do here, you want to drag the backlog status under the Kanban backlog. This will create a dedicated backlog area in Jira that will give you the ability to manage a larger backlog than just a column. You should notice on the left side menu, Backlog shows as an option now. Once you do that, we can repurpose the backlog column by renaming it to Ready and map our Ready status to the column. We can add the additional columns needed by clicking on the Add Column button and create our columns one by one. Once created, we need to map our statuses to our columns just by dragging them under one another. When completed, it should look like this. Once this is complete, we should go to our project Kanban board and see our new columns. Now let's test our workflow by creating a test user story. Click on the Create button. Your project should be filled in and issue type should be Story. Type in Test and click Create. The new user story should show up in our backlog. You can drag the user story from Backlog to Ready so that the user story shows up in the active Kanban board. If you expand the user story status should match with the column the user story is at that time. Now continue to move the user story from column to column and check to make sure the right status shows up for each column. Continue until the user story is in the Done column. If you were able to move the user story across the entire board and all the statuses match to your column, then congratulations, you just set up your new Jira project and Kanban board. In the next session, we will talk about work in progress. Limiting the work in progress. In the last two sessions, we defined our Kanban workflow, which resulted in the creation of our Kanban board that we implemented in Jira. Before we directly approach the work in progress limits, we need to make sure that everyone understands that Kanban is a pull system and what that means for how work flows through our board. Kanban is a pull-based process, meaning team members pull work to themselves when they have the bandwidth. Work is not pushed or assigned by someone else. That makes a big difference. This means as developers are ready to work on new items, they will pull a user story from the Ready column to the Development column. As work items are completed by the development team and our testers become available, the tester will pull work items from the Development Done column to their Testing in Progress column. Same applies for the rest of the columns. As the Agile or delivery lead, you need to make sure people like the product lead or stakeholders or anyone else are not pushing work on your board in the Development and Testing columns. As we mentioned in our Kanban intro, Kanban prioritizes flow of work, which has been shown to increase productivity. In order to accomplish this, we set limits to how many work items can be in progress at a time. It doesn't benefit anyone to have lots of work in progress and not to accomplish anything at the end of the day. The work in progress limit is applied to our Kanban workflow, which means we should have limits for our main statuses. Let's use our conceptual board to better explain this concept. The backlog is where all the requests first come in. User stories are not limited in this area. The Ready column represents the area of user stories that are ready and prioritized for the team to work on. The Ready column could also be referred to as the input queue. The size of the input queue can be directly determined from the prioritization cadence and the throughput or production rate in the system. For example, if a team is producing at a mean rate of 4 completed work items per week, with a range of 3 to 6 items per week, and the queue replenishing cadence is weekly, the queue size should probably be set to 6. We will talk more about the input and prioritization cadence in future sessions. Keep in mind this can be empirically adjusted as you get feedback from the system during your daily delivery. The WIP limits for development and testing columns are based on how many developers and testers we have in our team. In our case, we have 3 developers and 2 testers. As we mentioned earlier, a good start is having 2 work items per person, and we can empirically adjust from there as needed, with the assumption that developers only work from the development column and testers from the testing columns. That means our WIP limit should be 6 work items for development and 4 for testing. Review in progress, as mentioned earlier, will be used for user stories that are actively being reviewed by our product lead to make sure the work has been completed per the specifications provided in the beginning. As a start, we will not limit the WIP for this column. However, we do need to monitor closely and make sure this column does not become a bottleneck. In my experience, as long as we have an active and dedicated product lead for our team, this step should not slow down our team. It's important to keep a close eye and observe your team on how the work items flow through your Kanban board. WIP limits are important, but if you choose overly tight limits, it could put excessively stress on your organization, especially if your team is new to Kanban. What I found in my career is that lower maturity organizations with less experience and capabilities will have more impediments. Usually in this scenario, having too many impediments could cause your team and work to grind to a halt, resulting in team members being idle. Having too many people idle all the time could result in higher management blaming the Kanban process as the issue. The reality is Kanban will always expose and shine a light on where the problems are in an organization, but Kanban itself will not fix those issues. As the Agile lead, you're responsible to identify the constraints and with the help of your team, make micro adjustments to improve the flow and performance of the team. We will talk about metrics in future sessions. Try to be flexible with your team at the beginning as you start on your Kanban implementation so you don't overwhelm your team. With that said, not setting any WIP limits will result in a lower productivity. This is because in time, team members tend to accumulate lots of items in progress across the entire Kanban flow. This will look like the team is busy and working on a lot of items. However, at the end of the day, your goal should not be to look busy, but to actually get as many work items fully completed from end to end as possible. WIP limits will help you achieve exactly that goal. Next, let me show you how to implement these WIP limits in the Jira software. Applying WIP limits to our Jira Kanban board. In this section, we will show you how to apply the WIP limits discussed in our last session. In Jira, go to Board Settings from the top right and select Columns. Under this section, we should see all of our columns with 2 boxes displaying No Min and No Max. We will be using the No Max field to enter our WIP limits. As we discussed in our last session, for our Ready column, we will start with a limit of 6. This means we will enter number 6 in the No Max field under the Ready column. For the development, we mentioned we want to start with the standard 2 items per person, and since we have 3 developers, our WIP limit for development would be 6 work items. Now you notice we have 2 development columns. One is development in progress and the other development done. The recommended approach is for the 6 WIP limit to apply for the development overall, which means we should split the WIP limit between the 2 columns. This means each column gets a max WIP limit of 3 work items. What I noticed over the years is that for this low WIP limit to work well, you need to have a mature Agile team and low impediments in general. If this sounds like your team, this WIP limit would work well for you. If your team has a good amount of impediments and is a new team or not as experienced, I would start with a 6 WIP limit per each development column. This might be high at first, but you can start there for a couple weeks and monitor the team's flow on the board, and with time you can slowly decrease the WIP limit and find your optimal WIP limit. For our example here, we will assume we have a high-performing team and use 3 WIP limits per development column. For the testing column, our WIP limit is 4 work items since we have 2 testers. The same approach we just discussed for development applies for testing. For the purpose of this class, we will use 2 work items per testing column. For the review column, as we mentioned, our product owner will quickly review each user story to make sure it meets the agreed criteria for completion. For now, we will not have a WIP limit. However, we will monitor this column closely, and if we see user stories are starting to pile up and cause a slowdown in our user story delivery, we will apply a WIP limit as well. Once we enter our WIP limits in the max field, we can go back to our active Kanban board. In order to test our WIP limits, you want to create multiple test user stories and drag them into one of the columns that has a WIP limit. The moment you have more user stories in that column on the active board than the WIP limit, you should see the column turning red as you see here. This is how Jira visually tells you the WIP limit has been exceeded for that specific column. Congratulations on implementing your WIP limits in Jira. With that, we end this session. See you in the next one. In this section, we will cover how to define the definition of done for each step of the workflow. To quickly summarize, we have defined our Kanban workflow and our WIP limits. Now we need to have a common understanding between all our team members when a card should move from one column to another. In other words, we should define the definition of done for each step of the workflow. This will mitigate confusion and quality issues in the future and will result in improved efficiencies. Kanban regulates quality through a simple mechanism. Before the card moves from left to right on our Kanban board, each card must pass certain rules, which is our definition of done for that step. This is also called pull criteria in Kanban. The Agile lead should bring their entire team together, and as a group, they should agree on the pull criteria for each column and document them. This pull criteria or rules will be slightly different for each team. For example, a software development team might have different rules compared to a data services or data science team. Here is a general example of this criteria that applies for most software development teams that we will be using for our team. We will start with the Ready column. Before any card can be pulled in this column, each card should be broken down into user stories or bugs. Each work item should also include specifications and acceptance criteria for completing this user story. Any user stories under this column should not have any blockers or dependencies that will impede the development team from working on it. It's a good practice for the user stories to not take longer than a week to be completed. If the card takes longer than 1 week, we should try to break down this work into smaller work items. If you want to learn more about how to write good user stories, we have a great video under our YouTube channel linked as part of the resources of this class. The done criteria for the development done column should include code being reviewed and unit tested, acceptance criteria passed and any documentation needed is complete, and the code is available in the development environment. It's worth mentioning that our software development team will be using a typical development environment setup. This means we will have a development environment, a quality assurance environment, a staging environment used for user acceptance testing, and a production environment. The done criteria for the testing done column should be functionality is deployed to the quality assurance environment and all test cases passed and functionality works per the acceptance criteria. No known defects or bugs. Testing automation is updated to include the new functionality if applicable. For the review column, keep in mind that our product lead will be performing a high-level smoke test for any cards in this column. In order for any cards to be moved to our last done column in our Kanban board, the following criteria needs to be met. New functionality or fix is available in the staging environment. The user acceptance testing was successfully complete by our product lead. No defects are found, or if they are found, they are in an acceptable state by our product lead. Technical design specification updated. User story accepted by the product owner. These represent our done rules for our main columns. Keep in mind, the rules outlined here are a typical example for a software development team, and each team will have a slightly different version. The most important part of this exercise is that everyone in the team, including the product lead, are in agreement with the rules you all create as a team. Define Kanban classes of service. Kanban classes of service are used to classify different types of work based on their priority, urgency, or delivery times. Think of it just like the services at an airport. For example, the TSA PreCheck Fast Track service or other global service where you pay a fee to use an express lane for moving to the front of the line. The other lane could be the priority lanes for families with kids and disabled people, or the regular lane where you stay in line with everyone else and wait for your turn. In IT and software development, the same concept applies. For example, we might have a production defect which requires immediate resolution, or maybe a higher priority for a specific functionality which requires moving the work up the line. Due to these needs that we encounter on a weekly basis in our field of work, Kanban introduced the classes of services. The most common classes of services are expedite, fixed delivery date, standard class, intangible class. Let's define and explain these one by one and how we will use them for our e-commerce web team. After we explain each one of them, we will provide you with the main common rules or policies for each, and in the next session we will go over how to implement them in Jira. Expedite is just like we explained with our Fast Track Airport example. In software development, the expedite class is reserved for high urgency, high impact items. A good example for our e-commerce web team would be if a defect is found in production that doesn't allow our user to purchase a specific product. This issue is a huge problem since it directly impacts the company revenue, which means we have to fix it immediately. When a new request gets flagged as an expedited item, our team will pick this item to work on before any other existing user stories. Fixed delivery date is another Kanban class of service. This is the work that has a fixed deadline. These work items become more important over time, so it's beneficial to raise awareness of such items and look over this list before turning to work items in lower classes of service. These work items can be ordered based on how close their deadline is. For example, this could be for a vendor contract expiring in 6 months that provides us with a tool for our website that we want to build in-house. This means our e-commerce website team needs to build the new functionality that is currently provided by the vendor before the contract expires in 6 months. Any of this work will be tagged as a fixed delivery date class of service. Standard class of service represents all the regular tasks. These work items use the first in, first out principle. The intangible class of service work items need to be completed as well, but there's no rush for completing them right away. When prioritizing work, intangible tasks have the lowest priority. They are the class from which you are most likely to relocate capacity if an expedite task arrives. Some examples of these items could be technical debt or quality improvements and optimizations. These items are not critical, but in time, if they are ignored, they could cause performance issues or can even become critical in the long run. All these classes of service have some additional defined rules, also called policies, that makes it easier to know when and how to use each class of service. Let's look at those in the next session. Policies for Kanban classes of services. The policies for classes of services are really just internal team agreements that define a set of guidelines that should be followed during the execution of work. You can think of them as a checklist that says what needs to be done throughout the stages of the work process. They must be simple, well-defined, visible to everyone, and easy to modify. Let's look at some example policies that we will be using for our e-commerce website team. Keep in mind the policies we will look at are based on empirical evidence and they are used by many teams in the corporate world. With that said, you can definitely make adjustments with your team to these policies. Starting with the expedite policies. When an expedite item comes in, the first available qualified person must pick up the work item. Only one expedite work item is permitted at any given time on our active Kanban board. Once on the active board, the expedite work item may cause the WIP limit to be exceeded in order to accommodate the expedited request. It is possible that once the expedited work item is complete, it might need to go to production as soon as it's complete. This means it might require an off-cycle deployment to production. This is also known as hotfix production deployment. Capacity should not be saved or allocated in advance for expedite work items. For the fixed delivery date policies, the required delivery date is documented and displayed under the user story. These work items must follow the WIP limits. These work times do require some analysis and estimation of size and effort. They might require additional planning to get an idea if the date can be met or the capacity allocation needed. In general, the recommended capacity allocation for this class of service is around 20%. This means that 20% or below of the cards from our active board are fixed delivery date work items. These work items are released during a regular deployment cycle, but before the fixed delivery date. These work items could become expedite if the delivery date is missed. For standard class of service policies, these work items are selected into the input queue based on what the team decides brings the most business value or based on their cost of delay. If your team has a product lead, they can help with the prioritization. These work items use the first in, first out queuing approach as they get pulled through our active Kanban board. These work items must follow the WIP limits. A standard class work item is released during the regular release to production schedule. A good practice is for large work items to be broken down into smaller user stories, preferably to be finished in a week or less. For the intangible class policies, the team prioritizes them into the input queue based on their own team prioritization mechanism. These work items must follow the WIP limits. These work items are not necessarily picked by entry date, they can be pulled in an ad hoc way, as long as a higher class work item is not available. They are released with the regular release to production schedule just like the standard class. Typically an intangible item is put aside if an expedite work items comes in. These are our main policies for our main classes of service. As I mentioned, it's recommended for each team to create and document these rules. As the team matures in working in Kanban, come back and make any adjustment necessary to these policies. Also keep in mind each team might have slightly different policies. Next, we will look at how to implement these classes of services in our Jira tool. Implementing Kanban classes of service in Jira. Welcome back. In this section, we will show you 2 ways on how to implement and visualize your classes of services in Jira. As we defined earlier, our classes of services that we will be using for our team are Expedite, Fixed Delivery Date, Standard Class, Intangible Class. First, it is worth mentioning that Jira does not have a specific functionality dedicated for Kanban classes of services, so we will have to use some other existing functionality. With that said, the main mechanism we can use to show our classes of service is to create them as swim lanes part of our Kanban board. This can be accessed by going to our Kanban board settings and clicking swim lanes from the left side menu. A swim lane in Jira is a row on the board that can be used to group issues. Swim lanes can be created based on multiple things like you see here in this menu. We will be using queries. As you see, to create a swim lane, we will have to enter a name, the JQL, and a description. The JQL stands for Jira Query Language and is the most powerful and flexible way to search for your issues in Jira. Don't worry, it is very easy to create Jira JQL. I will show you how. Let's start by creating each class of service only by filling out the name field for now. We will create one for the Expedite class, one for Fixed Delivery Date, one for Standard Class, and one for Intangible Class. In order for our user stories to show up under these swim lanes, we will need to tag them with something. The 2 ways I recommend tagging your user stories is by either using the component field or using labels. Let me show you first by using the component field. We will need to go to the components section on the left side and create new components for each of our classes of services. Normally in Jira, components are subsections of a project. They are used to group issues within a project into smaller sets. For our purpose, we will use this field for our classes of services. Click the Create Component button and you can enter the name without filling the rest of the fields. Once you created all your classes of services as components, we will need to go back to our swim lanes to fill out our JQL for each class of service. One trick for getting the JQL for each class of service is to click directly on the new component created. This will take us to the filter by the component. If you click on Switch to JQL, it will give you the JQL we will need to use under our swim lane for that particular class of service. We will copy this entire JQL, go back to our project under the Kanban board, board settings, and swim lanes. Once here, we can paste the JQL under the matching class of service and just click Update. Go back to the Components section and repeat until you filled out all your classes of services with the respective JQL. By the way, it might be easier to have separate tabs open when doing this step. Now let's test our new classes of services using the Components field. You can use any existing user stories you have or by creating new user stories. All you have to do is fill out the component field under a user story and select one of the components we created. I recommend for your test to have a user story for each component so we can test all our classes of services and make sure our swim lanes are working as expected. Once we go back to our Kanban active board, you should see something like this. Each user story should be displayed under the swim lane that matches the component selected. Make sure that all your user stories have the component field filled out. Otherwise, your user story will not show up on your active Kanban board. Now, if you would like to use your component field for something else, we could use the label field instead of components. It's the same idea, we just need to tag each user story with a label that matches our classes of services instead of using the component field. Let me show you how you can do this. Labels don't have a dedicated area in Jira where they can be accessed like we showed for components. In order to create a new label, we have to go directly to a user story and, under the label field, type the name of the label we would like to create. Keep in mind that labels are case sensitive. For our example, we will type Standard. This label will represent our standard class of service. Once this is saved, you can click on it and it will take you to the filter for that specific label. Once there, we can copy the JQL, as we did for the components, and paste the new JQL under our swim lane that matches that class of service. Continue this process until you finish all your labels for each class of service. Test your solution by having a label for each class of service and make sure each user story shows up in the active Kanban board under the correct swim lane. Make sure that all your user stories have a label field filled out, otherwise your user story will not show up on your active Kanban board. Keep in mind the label field does allow multiple labels to be displayed under a user story, but for the purpose of this solution, we should only have one class of service label for each user story. Also, with labels, you have to be careful on the spelling because labels are case sensitive, and this can lead to having multiple versions of the same class of service created due to a slightly different spelling. I want to show you one more thing you can do to visually identify your classes of services. If you go under Board Settings and select Card Colors, we can use this functionality to select a specific color for our classes of services. For example, I would like to flag any user story with the class of service Expedite as red. All I need to do is copy the same JQL from the Expedite class of service Swim Lane into this section. Now when I go to my active Kanban board, my user stories that are flagged as Expedite will have a red line, which will help me easily identify this important work. You can use this functionality for all other classes of services as well. Now you know how to implement your classes of services in Jira by using either components or labels, and even how to color code your cards. With that, we end this session. See you in the next one. Work requests. Work requests can be slightly different depending on the scenario you are in. One scenario can be where your team determines your own backlog if they are the ones leading the work for building a new product. This might be a feature team like our e-commerce team example for this class. Another scenario is a service team. This team's backlog can be determined by stakeholders from the entire enterprise or by other development teams they support. We will talk in the second part of this class more about the feature team. In the scenario of a service team where you get your requirements or work requests from other teams or stakeholders, usually those requests tend to be on a more ad hoc basis, meaning you most likely do not know ahead of time all the work you need to do for the next 2 or 3 months in detail. This is common for a lot of teams in an enterprise. This is also the case for teams that are doing more support or operation work. This means that work requests will continuously flow into your team, sometimes ad hoc, and other times it might be scheduled or known ahead of time. This is where the Kanban method is used the most and is very popular. In this scenario, you most likely get a new work request every couple days or every week. In the next session, we will look at how we will structure these work requests in Jira. Jira Hierarchy. When work comes into our team, the requests get captured in Jira as issue types. Issue types are the basic unit of work in Jira software and come in various types: epic, story, subtask, bugs, and more. We will cover the most common issue types and the Jira hierarchy used in most of the enterprises. Let's run through some quick definitions. An epic is a large body of work made up of subsidiary stories. Epics will often span multiple development cycles, projects, and versions. Epics are broken down into smaller work items to be achieved. These smaller work items are stories. A story is a single unit of work that, taken alongside a larger group of stories, constitutes an epic. A story should be small enough that it can be completed in a single development cycle. Sometimes a story can be broken down into multiple steps of work and can even be worked at the same time by multiple people. In this scenario, some teams break down a user story into subtasks. A subtask is an even more granular decomposition of the work required to complete a story. A bug in Jira terminology is a piece of work that indicates there is something malfunctioning in a software and it needs to be resolved or fixed. To better visualize the relationship of all these issue types in Jira, imagine the overall relationship like this. Epic can contain stories and stories can contain subtasks. Bugs are independent of stories and can be mapped under epics as well. Let's look at an example in Jira. We can create a new issue type in Jira, like epic, user story, or bug, by clicking the Create button and selecting from the Issue Type dropdown. Let's create a test epic first. For the purpose of this example, we will just enter the required field when creating our epic. Once the epic is created, we can open the created epic, and we should see the button for Add a Child Issue. By clicking this button, we can create a child issue right under the epic. We can create a user story and bug right under this epic. All we need to do is enter the title for the user story and bug and click the Create button. We will just name these Test User Story and Test Bug for now. Once a user story is created, we can expand the user story created by clicking on the user story ID. Once we have the user story open, you can see the hierarchy above. This user story is under the epic we created earlier. We can create multiple subtasks under this user story if needed. This can be done the same way as we did it under the epic. After our subtask is created, if we open the subtask, we will see the subtask is the child of the user story as we did earlier for the epic as well. This matches our conceptual hierarchy displayed earlier between the epic, user story, and subtasks. In the second part of this class, we will talk more about how we break down a product and use these Jira hierarchy to structure our requirements in the backlog. Establish an input cadence for replenishing of backlog. Once your Kanban team has been established, it's just a matter of time until new requests will be coming in for your team, especially in the service team. This means you should have a process of how new items and requests will be assigned to your team. In this section, we will discuss the process of how work items get into our active Kanban board. For our team, this means how user stories and bugs get from our backlog into our ready column. Remember that our ready column represents the area of user stories that are ready and prioritized for the team to work on. The ready column could also be referred to as the input queue. In one of our earlier sessions, we mentioned that our queue size for the ready column is 6, and our queue replenishing cadence is weekly. Each team selects their queue size based on historical data of how many cards are completed in a week on average. Assuming our team has a product lead, this means our team will be meeting weekly with our product lead for the next user stories to be selected. Keep in mind, each week user stories can be pulled into our ready column only for the slots we have available at that time. In the case your team does not have a product lead and you are getting your requirements directly from business owners and stakeholders, make sure you meet with them first, and they understand the team Kanban process and how work flows in the team, especially your queue size. Being transparent and showing them how the queue size is being selected based on team average completion rate per week and not something that is made up should build trust with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders should also understand the classes of services that you set up for your team. This is important because your classes of services drive the priority of the work items once they land into your active Kanban board. You should make sure any requests coming in from stakeholders are mapped appropriately to your classes of service and delivery expectations are set with them. After the session with the stakeholders, if additional discussion is needed for the development team to flesh out more details on the requests and how to achieve them, the internal development team might spend some additional time internally to flesh out those details. In either scenario, having a product lead or not, agreeing on a regular cadence provides everyone with predictability. I recommend you pick the same time each week that everyone can commit to and join consistently. Some teams choose to have a meeting cadence every 2 or 3 weeks. However, I found more frequent sessions allows the input queue to be smaller, which results in shorter, more efficient meetings. My recommendation is to start with a week. To increase your efficiency for this session, you can email your product lead or business stakeholders a day ahead with the number of slots you think the team should have available. That way they can go over the backlog items themselves and come prepared to the meeting with the next items they want to prioritize. Once you have identified the next handful of work items which should go in your ready column, your development team will start working on them. Next, we will need to keep an eye on the work in progress to make sure items are flowing on the board and our team is not blocked on any of their work. One of the ways to achieve this is by having a Kanban stand-up. We will talk more on how to run an efficient Kanban stand-up in the next session. Kanban Stand-up. The purpose of the daily Kanban Stand-up is to track the status and the flow of work for our active work items. Kanban is all about the flow of work. The main things we watch for are if any items are blocked and if capacity has opened up across our Kanban board so additional work can be pulled in next. Kanban Stand-up is slightly different from Scrum Stand-up. During the Kanban Stand-up, there is really just one question that we ask our team, which is if any team members are blocked or if they need assistance. The stand-up should take 15 minutes or less. The delivery lead or project manager is the one usually facilitating the session and the entire development team participates. In a remote environment, the session starts by the facilitator sharing their screen and displaying the active Kanban board in Jira. The facilitator will start by asking the team members if there is anything that is impeding their work. If there are any impediments, there is a brief discussion on the issue with the entire team, and the delivery lead usually leads the coordination for fixing the issue. In some cases, additional conversations need to happen on the issue. In this case, the delivery lead and some of the team members might stay after the stand-up to figure out a fix or coordinate the next steps. After any impediment discussion, the delivery lead will want to quickly look over the board from right to left, which is in the same direction of the pull system, and review that all work items are updated and in the right status. Normally, each team member is responsible to update their work items on the board and make sure they are in the right status. Some teams that are not as mature at Agile delivery and Kanban might not be as consistent on updating their cards. As you work on this with your team, you might want to double-check the board for this scenario. As the board gets reviewed, one of the things to look for is if any cards can be pulled in next on the board. Keep in mind this is done based on your own WIP limits and input queue size rules that you and your team set together. The delivery lead should also keep an eye on any work items that have been in status for a longer time than usual. If this applies, ask for additional information on those specific work items. Sometimes developers get stuck on a problem without communicating they are running into challenges. Not everyone is comfortable with asking for help. One suggestion is to ask if the current work item or issue can be shared with other teammates. Keep in mind to approach this scenario in a not threatening way towards the team member that is currently working on the issue. You want to encourage collaboration between team members working on problems and not make people feel discouraged if they get stuck. Always keep a positive attitude and continue to motivate your team, even if challenges arise. Lastly, you want to get into the habit of always asking your team how we can improve the flow. All team members are encouraged to provide any observations, feedback, and potential solutions. In the case that additional discussion needs to happen regarding improvement of the flow, don't hesitate to have an after meeting. These are usually small meetings with a handful of people that occur spontaneously. The purpose of them is to discuss improvements or challenges and come up with solutions that can be tried right away. Don't hesitate to encourage experimentation with your team and try different things and see what works for your team. Next, we will take a look at some of the main flow challenges you might run into while running Kanban and how to handle them. How to handle blocked work items. The work item is being blocked due to external dependency. In this scenario, your development team started working on a work item, and in the middle of their work, they found out they have an external dependency. This means the development team is blocked for that specific user story. The dependency could be anything from requiring an external team to do some additional work, your team awaiting on external review, some type of approval, or just getting a simple question answered by someone from outside your team. In this scenario, you want to flag the work item on your Jira board as blocked. I recommend you use the flag functionality in Jira by right-clicking on the user story and selecting Add Flag. In comments, you should add all the details of the issue and tag the people needed for helping with the issue. When people are tagged in Jira comments, they get notified of the message, usually by email, and in the notification section of Jira as well. Flagging work items in Jira using this method turns the card yellow, which makes it easier to identify the blockers on your board. Keep in mind, blocked items still count towards the WIP limit. As long as the work item is still a priority, the card should stay in the same column until it gets unblocked. Everyone should work towards removing the block with the delivery lead leading the effort. Once the work item is unblocked, the Jira flag is removed and the card continues through the regular Kanban workflow. In the case the blocker cannot be removed for a long time, the team can discuss other options and potentially agree to move the block card back in the backlog until a solution is found. Moving the card back in the backlog should be an exception. An example of this type of blocker could be due to the need of having another team doing development work, which might not be available for support at that time. If you run in this scenario, make sure you continue to enter comments under the blocked card in the backlog. You should still have the flag on, so the work items stay yellow even in the backlog. As the delivery lead, you should continue to work with the other team on solving the dependency. Only when the dependency is resolved, the card will come back in the active Kanban board of the team. This is the most common and recommended way to handle blockers. I do want to take a minute and call out another way, which I've seen teams approach blockers that is not a great practice. Some teams create a column on their Kanban board specifically for blocked items. They usually don't assign WIP limits to this new column. As teams run into blockers, they move the card from the In Progress column to the Blocked column. The issue is that blocked columns artificially allow you to raise your WIP limits, and which defeats the entire point of having WIP limits. A blocked column is an anti-pattern in Kanban. It breaks the entire point of managing flow and removing the impediments that are halting the workflow. Traditional management might like this approach because it maximizes utilization and capacity. However, it does not provide flow of value to customers. This method just games the workflow to keep busy without solving problems. Last thing I wanted to show you is the meaning of the dots on a card. If you noticed, some user story cards have these dots on them. Those dots represent the number of days the user story has been in that specific column. This functionality in Jira is called Days in Column. Here is a mapping of all the visuals Jira has for this functionality. This functionality is enabled by default for all Kanban boards, but disabled by default for Scrum boards. Keeping an eye on the Days in Column visual, this could help with identifying user stories that are stagnating and even identifying potential blocked items. With that, we end this session. Thank you for watching. In this section, we will look at the main Kanban flow problems and challenges. In this scenario, testing is blocked because prior step has no items done. In this case, the quality assurance engineers have finished their user stories and no other work items are done from the development side. As you can see, the dev done columns are empty and the developers are all working on in-progress items. In this scenario, testers might find themselves without any user stories anywhere from a couple hours to even a day or two. In this case, the testers should first reach out to the developers and see if they can assist with anything on the implementation side. If the testers are not able to help on the development side, they should stay productive by improving their test coverage by writing automated tests, or improving their test cases, expanding documentation, or improving their tooling. They should always be working on improvements that will make them more efficient and improve the quality of testing in the future. Another challenge could be, development is starting to get blocked due to testing. In this scenario, development is at its WIP limit and testers still have items in progress. At this point, developers should reach out to testers and see if they can assist them with their testing instead of picking up additional user stories from the ready column. All developers should be able to test as well, as long as they are not testing their own work. Developers might not be excited to perform testing instead of development. However, keep in mind the goal is for the work items to flow smoothly through the Kanban and to minimize lots of in-progress work. This scenario should be an exception. If you find yourself in this scenario a lot, you should discuss with your team and identify the main source of your bottleneck. If needed, you can adjust the WIP limits, but make sure you understand the real source of your issue first. Another common challenge could be constantly getting blocked. If your team or work items seem to find themselves blocked a lot, you should have a discussion with your team and identify the main sources of the problem. For example, if your flow through each step is uneven or takes a long time, it could be that your work items are too big and need to be broken down into smaller user stories. This should be done during a refinement session with your team and before the cards get into your ready column. If a step goes from having lots of work to no work at all, try to increase the WIP limit for that step by 1, so that you create a buffer to handle the variation. If a step is slow in the Kanban workflow and the steps before and after are constantly being blocked, here are some things you can do. First, you would probably do a quick root cause analysis with the team and see what are some things you can do to make things faster. You could, for example, reallocate some people to the slow step or improve your tools or systems. You can adjust and lower the WIP limit for the other steps so that you can assign more people to the slow step. Another question teams run into pretty frequent is how to handle miscellaneous work. These work items could be different for each team and company. They could be things like the team working on an important review or executive session that might require a demo, or a conference approaching which requires putting together a presentation. When encountering any miscellaneous work items, it's important to capture them as user stories in Jira, just like all other requests. If multiple people need to work on it, you can create subtasks under that user story and assign them to different people in the team. Once the request has been defined and documented, insert the request in your active Kanban board and move it through your regular workflow just like all other items. Be flexible with this kind of work, and if needed, even create and define separate done rules for this type of work. Another Kanban challenge is in the scenario of some team members missing stand-up. If this happens from time to time, you should set expectations that people missing stand-up should still communicate any updates or challenges. In a remote environment, this can be done by some form of instant messaging or email. Even though they miss stand-up, they should still update their cards on the Kanban board. In the case this scenario happens consistently with a specific person, you should chat one-on-one with this person and better understand why they are missing stand-up. They might have a good reason. Try to work with them on a solution. In the case they don't have a good reason and they are skipping stand-up because they just don't think they need to show up, you might want to chat about this issue with management, especially if stand-up is a common and expected practice in your team. Another challenge could be new work coming in and plan keeps changing. What I mean by this is work that your team is already working on and work that has been already defined and prioritized in your ready column is no longer relevant due to some big change in your organization. This scenario happens from time to time. There could be many good reasons for the changes in priority or direction. Usually this comes from executives or higher management. The teams that are using the Kanban method are in the best position to quickly change direction with minimum impact. Kanban excels in this area. In this scenario, if any user stories are in progress already by your development team, you might want to let them finish those. You can double check on this with your management as well. It's usually a good idea to let them finish those in progress user story, and while they do that, the rest of the team can focus on defining and documenting the new requests. The original work items in the Ready column should probably be reviewed with stakeholders and product lead to see if any of them should be kept or just moving them all back in the backlog. Another common Kanban scenario is when new work item needs to be worked on by team members that are already busy. This scenario could happen when a team member has a specific technical skill that's needed for a type of work. When this work comes in and that preferred team member is busy, what we could do is assign the new particular work item to a different person and have the preferred team member review and provide assistance when needed. This might take longer for the work item to be complete, however, we are expanding the knowledge across the team, which will help with future bottlenecks. The other option is assigning the current work of the preferred team member to someone else, so they can pick up the new work item. Another Kanban challenge and question is, what happens when a new person joins the team? Let's say a developer. Usually this person needs to be onboarded for some time. The onboarding process and approach could be different for each company. One approach could be this new person might work together with another developer for some time until they learn more about the team. Another approach is the new developer starts picking up a user story right away and starts working on it, even if it takes longer for the work to be completed. From the Kanban perspective, in this scenario, we would most likely want to increase the WIP limit by 1. Once the developer can handle more work, the WIP limit might even increase by 2. This is different for each team, but don't forget to adjust your WIP limits as your team changes. A common challenge for tech teams is not having enough time for technical debt. These could be things like system or tools improvements, maintenance of current systems, transition from one tool to another, or even some type of automation that is needed. What I've seen is that most tech teams are trying to approach this work with the idea that they will get to it when they have more time. In reality, that time never comes due to higher business priorities. The best way to handle this work is to document it in user stories and have it ready, part of your backlog, just like all other work. Next, you want to have a team discussion and come to an agreement on allocation of a specific capacity for this type of work per month. Make sure you include management in that conversation as well, so the commitment is agreed by everyone. Next, you will have this work go through the same regular Kanban workflow, just like all your other work. You can use one of your classes of services, like the intangible class, to track this type of work and make sure the capacity the team agreed on per month is respected. The last Kanban challenges we will cover in this section is when teams get too excited and focus more on process than delivery results. At the end of the day, all the process and Kanban method outlined in this class is to deliver results and complete quality work in the shortest time possible. The Kanban method is one of the leanest and lightest approaches compared with a lot of other delivery approaches out there. You want to make sure the process doesn't grow artificially and start slowing the team down on delivering results. When you start as a new team, usually you want to be more strict on all the Kanban rules and approaches we discussed so far in this class. However, after the team matures and understands the concept, feel free to be more flexible. This could include WIP limits, the classes of services used, or any policies created by the team. You want to establish a trust with your team. With that said, you don't want to compromise the quality of the work delivered. A good practice is to review all your processes and rules from time to time and ask yourself which of those things are still needed. Most teams add processes and rules, but don't remove any of them, which might result in slowing delivery. And with that, we end this section. Next, we will chat about the exciting topic of metrics. Welcome to the Kanban Metrics session. There are a lot of metrics out there, and I've seen a lot of teams implement so many advanced metrics and get to a point where they don't even remember the main purpose of some of the metrics they implemented. I like to start with the basics and implement additional metrics as we need them. These basic metrics are also one of the most powerful metrics as well. I like to look at metrics as questions that we have as a team or that our stakeholders or business team might have. For example, how long does it take for a request to be completed from the moment it has been requested? This is called lead time. How long does it take for a request to be completed from the moment the development team starts to work on it? This is called cycle time. Or how many requests can the team complete on average in a month? This is called throughput. These are simple questions, but being able to answer these questions using a data-driven approach with real historical data can be very powerful. Having this type of information can allow you and your team to set delivery expectations with your stakeholders. With metrics, you can start predicting your delivery, and the more historical data you have with these metrics, the more accurate your prediction can be. For example, knowing that each request you receive from the business can be delivered within 10 days or less on average allows you and your team to establish service level agreements. A service level agreement is a commitment between a service provider and a customer. In this case, your team is the service provider. Let's look a little bit closer at how we define lead time and cycle time based on our Kanban workflow for our team. For our team, lead time gets tracked from the moment a user story is created in our backlog until the user story is complete in our done column at the end of our Kanban board. Cycle time starts being counted the moment the user story is actively being worked on by our development team. For our team, that means the cycle time starts from the moment our user story lands in our development in progress column and ends in our done column at the end of our Kanban workflow. Throughput is pretty simple. It's just how many work items we finished as a team within a time frame. The time frame we pick can be anything we would like. This can be a week or a month. Most teams keep track of items completed within a month. This metric can come in handy if we need to tackle a small project and we need to inform our executives how long it will take our team to complete the small projects. Let's say, for example, we get a small project request, and upon breaking down the project with our team into the smallest work items possible, we end up with 20 work items. Assuming our team throughput on average based on historical data is 12 work items per 1 month, we can predict with pretty high confidence the small project can be complete in about 2 months. Even though the difference between the upfront estimate and our monthly throughput is 4 work items, we always want to have some padding. It's also common that during the execution of the work, we might find additional work items that need to be completed that weren't anticipated up front, or some work items might take longer than expected. Which is why you always want to add 10 to 20% of padding to mitigate this risk. Next, let's take a look at how we can capture these metrics in our Jira tool. Welcome to our Kanban Metrics in Jira session. Jira does have some reports out of the box that can be used for the lead time and cycle time, but spoiler alert, they are not great. Most people use some kind of add-on for Jira to better capture these metrics. We will look at some add-ons as well, but let's first look at what Jira has out of the box and how to read and interpret these reports. One of the first reports we will be looking into is the cumulative flow diagram. This visual can be accessed from the left side menu called Reports. Under All Reports, you should see the Cumulative Flow Diagram report. This report shows how many items have moved from one state to another in a given period. From this visual, we can interpret the lead time, cycle time, and how long work items stay in one status. The horizontal x-axis indicates time, and the vertical y-axis indicates the number of work items. Each colored area of the chart equates to a workflow status, which is the same as our column on our board. If we were to draw a straight line that starts on the left side with our backlog color and ends to the right with the done color, this will represent lead time, just as you can see in this visual. The length of the line based on the x-axis tells us the timing. The amount of time that passed from the start of the line to the end of the line represents our lead time, which in this case is 20 days. If we draw another line, but this time starting with development in progress until the done column, this will represent our cycle time. In this example, our cycle time is 14 days. This means that a request stays in our backlog for about 6 days before it starts to be worked on. The cumulative flow diagram also shows you how many days user stories are in each status. For example, you can use the same method we calculated lead time and cycle time and check the WIP for each status and see if any of the statuses are much higher than others. This can be used to identify if any area in our workflow needs improvement. As you can see from the visual, most of our user stories stay in these 3 statuses: backlog, dev in progress, and testing in progress. This is pretty normal. Here are some of the common patterns that you need to watch out for. Narrowing bands. This indicates that there is less work than the team's capacity. There may be a need to relocate team members to balance out the workload. Widening bands indicates a bottleneck. This means that the entry rate of the items to this state is faster than its exit rate. Analyze what is causing the holdup and apply corrective action. Ready status band is wider than your done band. Indicates that your team cannot consume the work as fast as you are adding them. This can mean several things, which can include capacity problems and insufficient information about the tasks. Slope is flat, indicates that no work has been done. Not always a cause for alarm, as this can happen during holidays or no work days. Next, let's look at the control chart. This chart is another way to find lead time and cycle time. It takes the time spent by each issue in a particular status or statuses and maps it over a specified period of time. This chart lets us refine the timescale and the columns we want to select. By leaving all our columns selected, it will show us the lead time. If you want to get your cycle time, you have to select only the columns that represent work in progress. In our case, that is dev in progress, dev done, testing in progress, testing done, and review column. The x-axis represents time and the y-axis represents the number of days spent working on issues. The solid green dots are clusters of work items and the open green dots are single work items. Their position on the chart indicates the date they were updated or resolved and how long it took from when work began. Red line represents the average lead time for the total time period displayed in the report. The blue line represents the rolling average lead time. Based on the time scale selected, on the top left you will see your average and median time. For example, if we pick in our case from mid-Feb to mid-May, and we leave all our statuses checked, our average lead time is 1 week and 5 days, which is really 12 business days. And we can see this average includes 23 issues. If we only select our columns that represent in-progress work, our average cycle time is 1 week and 3 days, which is really 10 business days. In the next session, we will take a look at how to create a filter for our throughput and how to create our own Jira dashboard. Jira Dashboards. Let's look at throughput. As mentioned earlier, throughput, it's just how many work items we finished as a team within a time frame. Most teams pick the time frame items completed within 30 days. Unfortunately, Jira doesn't have a good out-of-the-box visual of looking at our throughput. What we can do is create a Jira query that shows us our work items completed within 30 days. Once we create the filter, we can use this filter to populate a dashboard. Don't worry, I'll show you step by step how to do this. First, we need to create our filter. Go to Filters, view all filters, and click the Create Filter button. Pick your project first. Next, select the issue types. For our example, we want to select user stories and bugs. You don't usually want to select epics and subtasks. That is because epics are the parents of user stories and subtasks are child issues of user stories. In case you are using tasks, you should select those as well. Next, you want to select the status. In our case, you want only the work items completed. For us, this status is done. And select your time frame within the last 30 days. Click Search, and you should see your work items completed within 30 days. This is your throughput. As you can see, our team finished 12 work items in 30 days. We should save this filter. You can click Save As, and I will save this filter as done in the last 30 days. Next, we will create our own dashboard. To create your own dashboards, click the Dashboards from the top menu and create Dashboard. We'll name this Kanban Dashboard. You can change the permissions of who can view it or edit your dashboard as well. Once you save it, you will have an empty dashboard and you can add any Jira gadgets from the right side. Normally, to visualize our throughput, we would like a histogram so we could see historical throughput per each month. Unfortunately, Jira does not have this visual out of the box. So what we can use is a pie chart in which to plug in our newly created filter. Under Gadgets, you can search for pie chart and drag it on your dashboard. Once it's there, search for your filter, in our case, done in the last 30 days. From the static type dropdown, you can select what you would like to see. You can select issue type, and in our case, this will show us how many user stories versus bugs completed in the last 30 days. Since we implemented classes of services earlier by components, I would like to see our work items completed by class of service. You can click the 3 dots in the top right, select Configure, and pick components from the dropdown and save. This visual is useful because we can get multiple uses from it. We can get our throughput, but we can also manage our capacity per class of service. When teams implement classes of service, they usually try to follow a capacity allocation per class of service. This pie chart allows you and your team to monitor your current allocation in the last 30 days. And default example allocation for these classes of services is 20% for fixed delivery, 50% for standard, 30% for intangible, plus or minus 5% for expedite. By having this live pie chart, you can better manage and adjust your allocation per your goal. You can hover with the mouse over the pie chart and you can see your actual percentage per each class of service. Let's look at another dashboard chart that will be helpful for our Kanban team. The average time in status. This live chart is another way for us to see the trend of how much time on average a work item stays within a status. As we mentioned earlier, this information is available in the cumulative flow diagram. However, in my opinion, it is harder to read. To create this chart, We first want to search for it on the right side and click Add. Then we want to select our project. Under the Status section, we want to select all our statuses that we are using. In order to multiple select, you will have to press and hold the Command key on a MacBook or Shift key on Windows while you click all your statuses. It's a bit of a struggle to scroll and multi-select. Once you select only the statuses that are used on your board, you want to select your length of period. I picked weekly. And for average duration and status, pick days. For the days previously field, I picked 30 days. If you want to see more historical data, you can pick 90 days or more. Pick a refresh interval. Every 2 hours works for me. Now you can click Save. Each line represents a status and the color legend is displayed at the bottom of the chart. On the left of the chart, you can see the number of days. If you hover over the dot for each line, you will see the average per status. In this example, we don't have enough data. Let's look at another example we have that has better data. This chart is helpful to see how your team is trending for each status in general. Every time you improve the process or make any changes in your team, this chart will tell you how each status is impacted or improved. These are some of the most used out-of-the-box Jira reports and charts for Kanban. As you see, the standard charts and dashboard in Jira are pretty basic. If you're looking for some better Kanban charts or dashboards, you will have to install an add-on from Jira Marketplace. You will have to go under Apps and explore more apps. Some of the popular ones are Time and Status for Jira Cloud, that allows more customization and additional insights for cycle time and lead time. Another good one is Great Gadgets for Jira Cloud. This one has both Scrum and Kanban charts. This marks the completion of the first part of our Kanban class for how to implement Kanban. In the second part of our class, we will discuss how to plan and execute a project using the Kanban method. See you in the next one. Part 2. How to plan a project or digital product with Kanban. Welcome to the second part of this class. In the first part of this class, we provided an intro and overview of the Kanban method and how to implement Kanban in a hands-on way using Jira. Everything we covered so far works very well for service teams, operations teams, or support teams. But what about if you are a feature team? A team that works on new projects or builds digital products where there are expectations on delivery dates and product releases. As mentioned in the beginning of this class, Kanban is not a methodology or framework. It should be applied to an existing process or way of working, and it doesn't replace a methodology or framework, which is why there are some things it doesn't specifically account for out of the box. One of them is how to execute a new project or build a digital product end-to-end. This is what we will cover in the second part of this class. In order to do this, we will need to introduce additional Agile practices and approaches from different methodologies to allow us to plan, execute, and track development when working on a project or building a digital product using Kanban. Here are some of the things we will cover in the second part of this class. We will talk about some of the planning that needs to be done up front. We will show you how we will break down a project or product. We will cover estimation of delivery and forecasting, and track delivery and milestones. Keep in mind these concepts assume the approach and process introduced in the first part of this class still applies. Let's talk about the typical cycle of software development before we jump into the details of our e-commerce software project. System Development Lifecycle, or SDLC, is a fundamental and traditional process that everyone must know when building anything in technology, especially in software development or information systems like our e-commerce platform. SDLC is a proven cost-effective and time-efficient process used by development teams to design and build quality software since the 1960s. During the SDLC process, a typical project goes through several development stages as developers add new features and fix bugs in a software. These stages are planning, where the team initiates the project and captures requirements; designing, where the team's architects and designers design the best solution; implementing, where the main development and building happens; testing, where manual and automated testing takes place to make sure everything works as expected; deploying, typical to multiple environments and ultimately to a production environment, where the main users or stakeholders can access the finished digital product or project. And the last phase is maintaining, where the team fixes bugs and manages any software changes. These are the conceptual main phases. However, these phases can be arranged in different varying chronological orders that optimize the development cycle. The different ways these phases are organized are called SDLC models. The most common SDLC models are Waterfall and Agile. Waterfall is the traditional and oldest model which has been used since around the same time as the SDLC has been out. The main approach of the waterfall model is that it arranges all the phases sequentially for the entire project. This means that each new phase depends on the outcome of the previous one. This model does provide a good structure to project management, however, it has some big limitations. This model is not welcoming of changes in general to a phase that is considered already complete. For example, once we are in the development phase of a project, changes are not welcomed to the planning and design phases. In today's fast-paced digital environment, when changes come so often, it makes it difficult to successfully apply the waterfall model to a project, especially if the work involves lots of unknowns or newer technologies. In these scenarios, this model adds a lot of risk to a project. The Agile model became more popular in 2001. Agile arranges the SDLC phases into several development cycles. The team iterates through the phases rapidly, delivering only small incremental software changes in each cycle. Requirements and plans are evaluated continuously, so changes can be made quickly. Agile models can release a project in increments. This means the development approach slices the product into smaller, fully working slices. The main benefit with this model is feedback from customers is received much earlier. Changes can be made after each slice of the project is delivered, instead of waiting for the entire project to be complete. When developing a digital product in Agile, one technique is to develop a minimal viable product or MVP. This is a partial product that has enough features to attract early adopter customers, for the purpose of validating the product idea early in the development lifecycle. This allows the development team to maximize the feedback with the least amount of effort. Instead of finalizing the entire project end-to-end in a waterfall approach, this method has the team working only on a handful of features. The launch of these handful of features should still provide the customers with value. This will be our approach for the e-commerce website used in this class. Instead of working on all the features of the website, which will take a very long time to complete, we will only work on the MVP version of our e-commerce website. This will allow us to share our offering with customers, validate if there is interest in our product while minimizing development effort towards our website. Example companies that use this approach are Airbnb or Foursquare. Now that we have a better understanding of the core software development cycles, let's talk about the approaches to planning using these concepts. Planning. Even though we will execute using Kanban, when working on a project or digital product, some level of upfront planning is still required even in Agile delivery. In the waterfall methodology, projects have a large upfront analysis and planning session that breaks down the project end to end. This is a risky approach because a lot of things change, especially over a long time frame. With this said, we do find value in doing some upfront planning in Agile delivery as well. However, we want to plan just enough for the team to get started. For some teams, this means planning the MVP or the first couple milestones. Even if the team plans only the MVP, the initial planning should still include defining the project approach and the technical architecture of the product. Other teams plan using a specific time box. For example, teams plan work in more detail only for the next upcoming 3 months. Usually by the time teams deliver the first milestones or the first 3 months, they learn a lot of new things and receive feedback. This allows them to make adjustments or pivot for the next phase of the project. This keeps the team more agile compared to the waterfall approach, especially in today's market where things change so fast in the digital world. Just look at how fast things have been changing in the AI space since the release of ChatGPT. Next, we will talk about breaking down our project. In this session, we will discuss how you go about building your backlog. In our example, our web commerce team has been tasked to build a new website that will sell physical products. Every project or main initiative starting out includes some kind of discovery session and a breakdown of the project. This entire process is product-focused and usually is led by a product lead in partnership with business stakeholders and the technical leads. This part can be a product class of its own, so for the purpose of this class, we will provide you with the main things you need to know to successfully run delivery and execution of the work in Kanban. As a delivery lead, you need to know what is the outcome of this exercise and what is expected from the product lead. As mentioned before, some teams might not have a dedicated product lead. In that case, most likely an analyst from the team might take on that role, or that role might be shared by the entire team. The outcome will be a set of features which will be broken down into smaller functionalities. This exercise of breaking down the project is usually a series of working sessions. In a remote environment, this can be done with the entire team over a Zoom meeting using a visualization tool like Miro. In Miro, you can create a section as you see here outlining the high-level features. For our e-commerce web team example, The first phase of our project is represented by these features. Our first feature is building an e-commerce proof of concept website. This is pretty much the skeleton of the website without any actual functionality. The second feature is ability to administer products and product categories. The third feature is website to display products by category for our customers. Fourth feature is ability for customer to subscribe for notifications for products coming soon. These four features will allow us to launch the website live with products being displayed on the website, even if customers are not able to purchase them. This will allow us to market our products, and customers will have the ability to tell us which of the products they like the most before they are available. This will focus our efforts on the inventory that gets the most attention and will allow us to market our products and website before release. Now that we defined our features, let's take a look on how we break these features down into our Jira epics. This can be done by just adding a new row for the epics, which will be mapping directly to our features above. For the e-commerce proof of concept feature, we will break it down into two epics, one for discovery of the architecture and backend. This epic will be used for the research and design we need to do up front before we start building the proof of concept. The second epic will be called e-commerce proof of concept website. Under this epic is where we will actually build the prototype website based on our discovery and architecture. For the second feature, we will just have one epic by the same name, which is ability to administer products and product categories. Under this epic, we will be building the back-end ability for an admin to maintain new user accounts and administer product inventory. For the third feature, we will just have one epic by the same name again, which is website to display products by category. This epic will provide us with the front-end ability of the website to visualize the website homepage and the products by our categories. The fourth features will have one epic as well and will allow our customers to have the ability to subscribe for specific products and request notifications when these products will be available in the future. Now our team has their features and epics, which provides them with a better understanding of the needs of our stakeholders and customers. However, our delivery team needs more detailed requirements in order to start building our new e-commerce platform. That is where the user stories are coming in. Now we need to break down our epics into user stories. In order to do this in Miro, we will just add another row right under our epics so we can keep track of the mapping between them. Our discovery and architecture epic will have two user stories. 1. Spike for researching technology and architecture that are best suited for building the entire platform, and 1 for establishing environments and pipelines for 3 environments. We also added a red arrow from the first user stories to the second one to indicate the dependency between the two user stories. The team cannot work on the second user story until the first one is complete, which makes sense. We need to know the architecture design before we can start creating the back-end environments. Visual boards like Miro are very helpful during this phase of the project because it allows breaking down the projects while the entire team collaborates. It's highly beneficial for planning and brainstorming sessions like these. Most of the teams have remote team members, and a digital collaboration platform is designed to facilitate remote and distributed team communication. Let's break down our second epic. For the e-commerce proof of concept, we will have a handful of user stories like design and implement database structure for all 3 environments, development, quality assurance and production environment, develop prototype web service that is integrated with all environments, develop web front-end placeholder that is integrated with all environments, end-to-end integration testing, design front-end system and wireframes. As you can see, these epics and user stories represent the main infrastructure to get our website set up. In an enterprise, most of these technical epics are broken down by a technical lead or architect, especially at the beginning of a project or product. The completion of these 2 epics represent our first milestone. For our third epic, our user stories are ability to log in for administrator and develop main admin dashboard page. These user stories will create the back-end website, access and functionality from where our admin is able to manage our product. The next user stories will be the ability to create, edit, and remove product items, and ability to create, edit, and remove product categories. These user stories will satisfy our epic. As you break down the user stories, you should mark the dependencies between the user stories so later on you know in which order to work on your user stories. In your whiteboard, you can just have red lines between your user stories that are dependent on each other, as I did here. The completion of this epic represents another milestone because this will give us the ability to manage our product and inventory in general from the back end of the website. Our third epic, Display Products by Category, has the following user stories. implementing the front-end homepage for products, implementing the category page, implementing the product details page, which should include things like description, photos, and like button. The completion of this epic is a big milestone because our stakeholders and users should be able to see our products on the front end of our website. Our last epic is the ability for customers to subscribe for notifications for products coming soon. For now, this epic will have 2 user stories: ability for capturing user contact information for out-of-stock products, and ability to notify users for products they selected. All these epics and user stories represent our MVP for our e-commerce project, which will allow us to launch our website. When teams are working in person in an office environment, this exercise is usually done using stickies and cards on a wall. In a remote environment, it can be done using a video conference and a tool like Miro as the visual whiteboard, as you see here. The facilitation of this session can be done by a product lead or even the delivery lead. You want to make sure you have all the people needed for the session, and everyone is encouraged to participate in conversation as the breakdown of work happens. At the end of this exercise, you should have defined your epics and broken them down into user stories while keeping track of any internal or external dependencies. Once this session is done and there is an overall agreement on the approach of the project, the product lead will enter the epics and user stories in Jira. Let's take a look at how to do that and how to organize our backlog before we start working on it. Creating our backlog in Jira. In this session, we will be creating our Jira backlog based on our prior session in which we broke down our project in Miro. Your backlog in Jira should be created by the product lead, or an analyst might take the role if you don't have a dedicated product person. To create a Jira epic, you can just click the Create button and change the issue type to Epic. You want to make sure all the Jira epics have at least a description and acceptance criteria. As an example, let's create our e-commerce proof of concept website epic. It is important for the epics to have an acceptance criteria so the team can clearly know when an epic is completed. We don't want to have never-ending epics without a clear understanding of when they are complete. This mistake is pretty common with enterprise teams. We can start our epic with writing a general background for our epic. In our case, we can add this as the background. The purpose of our e-commerce website in general is to allow our company to sell our physical products directly to our customers without having to use a third-party platform service like Shopify or Amazon. This will allow us to connect directly to our customers, increase profit and our customer engagement while growing our brand. For our epic acceptance criteria, this epic should really just create the skeleton of the website. This should include back-end architecture and environments, placeholder front-end website design, integration between front-end and back-end. Under each epic, you can create your user stories by clicking the plus sign under the Child Issues section. Just make sure the issue type is selected as Story. Each user story should include a description and acceptance criteria as well. These are the 5 user stories that we will need to satisfy the acceptance criteria for this epic. These are the same user stories defined in our breakdown session earlier. Once you create all your epics and all the user stories under the matching epics, you should be able to see them in Backlog. You can turn on the Jira Epic panel and all the epics should show up on the left side. The user stories should have the appropriate mapped epic to it, as you can see here in our Jira Backlog. With your epic panel open, you can also drag the user story to the appropriate epic, and Jira will automatically map the user story to the epic. The user stories should all include a description of the requirements, usually in the user story format with an acceptance criteria and any other technical specification required. Let me expand each user story so you can see all the user story description and acceptance criteria. As you can see, the first user story is a spike. A spike is the name for a time-boxed user story or task that is created in order to research a question or resolve a problem. Spikes focus on gathering information and finding answers to questions rather than producing a shippable product. For us, we are using a spike to research and find what would be the best architecture for our e-commerce platform. As I'm clicking through all the user stories, you can just pause the video for each one if you want to look in more detail at each user story. You will notice most of the user stories under the first 2 epics are listed as enablers. An enabler is a story that is not delivering business value on its own right away. Instead, it enables the team to deliver the value in future iterations, building on top of the outcome of the enabler story. It's common that at the beginning of any big platform creation or project in general, some of the architecture and technical infrastructure needs to be built first. These types of user stories are referred to as enablers. By the way, each user story description and acceptance criteria will be available to you as an attachment, which you will be able to download. The work listed in the backlog should be prioritized. For a feature team building a new product, prioritization should be easier since the work items should first be prioritized by their natural sequence of execution, while considering the dependencies outlined between user stories. The Jira backlog should be ordered with the highest priority at the top and the lowest at the bottom. The dependent user stories should be linked to their dependent counterparts. You can do that by going under the linked issues for any user story and selecting the proper mapping and then selecting the other user story. In future sessions, we will look at ways on how to estimate a significant product release in Kanban. Estimate delivery of our MVP and forecasting in Kanban. In Kanban, project forecasting is tightly related to how stable and predictable your workflow is. In other words, you need to balance work arrivals with departures, monitor increasing work in progress, and alleviate bottlenecks to maintain a smooth flow. In order to be able to forecast in Kanban, you need to know two main things: your throughput, based on historical data, the work that needs to be completed in the form of user stories based on project breakdown. As we mentioned in the metrics session, we need to have an idea of our throughput for a specific time frame. Once you have that information, we will apply the same method we used earlier. Let's say you know your throughput for the last 3 months. If you need help on how to pull data for your throughput, make sure you go back to the Jira Dashboards section. Let's say our throughput for prior month 1 is 12, month 2 is 15, and month 3 is 13 work items completed per month. Our average throughput is about 13.3 and our range is 12 to 15 work items per month. This information is very valuable for estimating project delivery or forecasting in Kanban. Next, we will have to take a look at the outcome of our project breakdown. If we look back to our MVP breakdown earlier, the total user stories needed are 16. So if our monthly throughput average per month is 13.3, this gives us an idea of when our project would be completed. Before we communicate to anyone outside the team any expectations on delivery, you want to make sure you add some buffer. Buffer is needed to mitigate the risk if the team identifies additional work needed to be completed under the same scope, or work taking longer than expected. To mitigate all of this and provide a more conservative estimate, we will add a 20% buffer. The total user stories that we need to complete for our MVP, including the buffer, is now 19. When the timeline is this short for a project, I would look at the throughput per week. Using our average monthly throughput of 13.3 means we should complete about 3.3 work items per week. If we divide our padded 19 work items needed to be completed by 3.3 work items per week, we get 5.7 weeks needed to complete the project. To round up, that means we should finish our MVP in about 6 weeks. One very big disclaimer for this method is this method assumes that your team was able to break down the project in small user stories that are pretty similar in size from one another. Your development team are the ones that can confirm if most of the user stories are similar in size. There will always be exceptions, but most of them should be similar in size. This applies for the historical data used for your throughput as well. If this is not the case for your team, and the user stories vary in size in your historical data and your project breakdown as well, you might want to have estimates for each one of your user stories. Some teams estimate user stories in story points and others use time for estimations. Either way, you would use the same technique as we did earlier. For example, if you use story points, you would add your monthly throughput as a total number of story points completed, and also add the total number of story points needed for your new projects based on your project breakdown. Now that we have a high-level delivery estimate for our MVP, in our next session, we will look at how we can monitor our delivery towards completion. Track your delivery with Jira Roadmap. From our last session, we know our MVP should be completed in about 6 weeks, with completing an average of about 3 user stories per week. Our Miro breakdown is a great way to visualize the initial product breakdown and the main milestone. However, since our team will be executing on the product based on the user stories outlined in our Jira, we need to use some of the live Jira mechanism to track our delivery. One way to track live delivery in Jira is the Jira Roadmap. Typically, this mechanism is not used in Jira for Kanban unless you are working on a project or new product, as we are in this section. Let's take a look at how we use the Jira Roadmap for our example project. To access the Jira Roadmap, click on the Roadmap from the left panel. As long as you have your epics created, the epics should show up on your left side of the roadmap and the timeline on the right side. You can change the timeline view from the bottom right side of the screen. Each epic should expand, which will allow you to see the user stories under that epic. If you don't see this right away, you might need to go to the top right side and configure your roadmap. Under Configuration, just turn on Child Level Issue Scheduling. We can drag our epics around and arrange them in the chronological order based on our breakdown. Once our epics are in chronological order, we can create a timeline for each epic based on our estimate and the breakdown from Miro. Let's look at each epic. The Discovery of Architecture and Backend has 2 user stories. We know on average the team should finish about 3 user stories per week. Usually Discovery and Architecture take longer, so we will estimate a week for this work. You can click directly on the timeline across the epic to create a visual for your estimate. The next epic is E-commerce Proof of Concept Website, which has 5 user stories. This should take shy of 2 weeks. Keep in mind the second epic is fully dependent on the first one, which means it can only start after the first epic is fully complete. You can drag a line from one epic to another to visualize the dependency. The next epic is Ability to Administer Products and Product Categories, which has 4 user stories. This should take about 1 week and a half or less. This epic is fully dependent on the prior one as well. The next epic is Website to Display Products by Category, which has 3 user stories. This should take a week and is dependent on the prior one as well. The next epic is Ability for Customers to Subscribe for Notifications for Products Coming Soon, which has 2 user stories. This should take less than a week and is dependent on the prior one as well. If you would like, you can mark dependencies in this roadmap view at the user story level as well to match the dependencies highlighted in Miro. Now we have a live roadmap that allows us to monitor our execution towards our epics. This roadmap should be reviewed with the entire team weekly to monitor progress towards our MVP. In the next session, we will look at how to track our milestones as well. Track your milestones with Jira Versions. The only thing missing is the ability to see our milestones that we outlined in Miro. To do that, we will be using the Jira Version functionality. Jira Versions are points in time for a project. They help us schedule and organize our releases. This functionality will allow us to see our 3 milestones during the execution of the project in the same Jira Roadmap visual. We will be creating a version for each milestone and map all the user stories that need to be completed per each milestone. Each milestone will have an expected delivery date based on our estimate. I do want to call out and acknowledge that we will be using this Jira Version functionality to track our milestone in a conceptual way, which is slightly different from what this functionality was intended for. Let me explain. Jira Versions are commonly used for release planning for the purpose of tracking user stories completed. All the work under a release version is usually all deployed at a time as part of deployment release to production. Each version released is usually communicated by the product lead as release notes to stakeholders and consumers. Jira Versions can even be integrated with the deployment pipeline, also called continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline, for the purpose of showing in a live way which user stories have been deployed by the development team. We will use the Jira Versions functionality for the purpose of release planning, but we will also use it to track our milestones from the project management perspective, for the purpose of tracking and making sure our delivery is on time for each milestone, and able to communicate risk and delays to our stakeholders and business owners. Now that you have a better understanding of how Jira Versions are being used in general, let's create our own Jira Versions. Start by going to the Releases section on the left side panel. Click Create Version. For the name, we will keep it simple and call it Milestone 1, but feel free to call it something that will make more sense for your audience. Some people might call it Version 1. Your product lead will most likely have a preference. The start date should be the date when you start working on the first user story, and the release date for us will be the end of our second epic. As you remember, we will be recreating our milestone from Miro as Jira Versions. You might have to go back to your Jira Roadmap to find your estimated end date for those epics. You can hover with the mouse over each one and see the start date and end date. We will create our milestones really quick and then come back and map our user stories to each one. Our second milestone will be created as Milestone 2 and should have the start date and end date of our third epic, so match the release date with that epic. And our third milestone will be created as Milestone 3 and match with the start date and end date of our fourth epic. Once they are created, you should have something like this. If we go back to our roadmap, we should be able to see our release versions displayed looking like milestone. Now, in order to be able to track progress at the user story level towards each milestone aka version, we need to map our user stories to each version. There are 2 ways to do this. You can open each user story and under the field Fix Version, select the matching version. For example, the first 2 user stories should be version 1 for us. The other option is to go under the version itself by going to the Release section, click on your version, click the Add Issues button, and search for your user stories. Once you add all your user stories to the versions, they should show up as we have here. These are all the user stories under our milestone 1. Once your team starts working on the user stories, you can come back here and see the progress towards your milestone. The versions listed in your roadmap do have a couple more functionalities. You can click on a version from your roadmap and you can highlight it on the timeline and filter your work items on the roadmap by that specific version. This is helpful if you have a busy roadmap and want to just focus on a specific milestone. Once your roadmap and your versions are created, it is important to monitor your team delivery towards these milestones on a regular basis. These 2 live artifacts, like the Jira Roadmap and Jira Versions, are critical for keeping your team focused and on track towards your delivery goals. These 2 mechanisms are essential for communicating status and expectations to your stakeholders and business owners. It's recommended to have regular cadences with them, weekly or bi-weekly, to review the roadmap and milestone updates and discuss any project risks or blockers. Visibility into project progress or even issues is a very important way to build trust with your stakeholders and business owners. As a delivery lead, being able to manage a project execution with these mechanisms and approaches will set you up for success. You will be seen not only as a capable delivery lead in any organization, but also a model that other people should strive towards. Companies and large enterprises bring outside consultants and pay them large amounts of money just to set these standards and train their teams on how to execute in Kanban. Some consultants' training is mostly theoretical without showing you too much hands-on application as we did in this class. This is the end of our second part of this class. In our last section of this class, we will show you how to position yourself and get recognized as an Agile delivery expert in your company. Part 3. How to get recognized as an Agile delivery expert in your company. In order to get recognized as an Agile delivery expert in your company, you need to follow this approach. First, you need to know how to implement a method or framework of delivery, like the outlined in this class. Second, you need to capture performance metrics of the current delivery. Third, implement your delivery approach in your own team. Fourth, you need to improve team performance and show results, so start measuring team performance based on your new Kanban delivery. Fifth, promote your process and success across the organization. Sixth, offer to help other departments. Let's expand on each point. First, you first need to know how to implement a method or framework of delivery that has been already proven out. You need to know this framework well so you have the knowledge on how to implement it step by step with either a brand new team or an existing team. This is exactly what we showed you in this class. This Kanban method has been used and proven out over the years in multiple teams over the world, especially by teams building or maintaining digital products or IT systems. Second, before you start implementing the Kanban method, make sure you capture metrics of the current performance of the team. I recommend you capture cycle time and throughput like we discussed in the metrics session of this class. The current team might not have an automated mechanism to capture these metrics, so you might have to dig through their completed work and manually calculate these metrics. This step is important, so you have a base for the team to which you can compare later on. Third, once you captured your base metrics of the current team performance, start implementing the Kanban method, just like we showed you in this class. Keep in mind that when you first start, it will take some time for your team to get used to working in a new way. So be flexible and have patience with your team. Take some time to explain to the team the new process. It's normal for your team to take a couple months to adjust to the new process, but make sure you introduce the metrics from the beginning. Fourth, improve team performance. You might have to continuously adjust the process and approach and maybe even customize some of the aspects of delivery for your own team. Combine feedback from your team with a data-driven approach to make these improvements. You can do this by analyzing your metric data and the flow of your work with your team on a regular cadence. Based on analyzing your metrics and data, you should continuously make micro-adjustments of the process and improvements of the flow. Have patience, it might take 2 to 3 months before you see significant improvements. If you monitor your metrics, you should see improvements month by month in metrics like cycle time and throughput. Fifth, after you start seeing improvements in delivery performance from your team, you need to promote your process and success across the organization. A good approach to do this is to plug into an existing corporate process where you can showcase your results and approach. First, you want to make sure you have 2 or 3 months of performance data that shows improvements over the base metrics before your new delivery implementation. You also want to get positive feedback on the new delivery process from team members of your own team. Capture this feedback as positive testimonials. Once you have all these things, create a presentation where you outline your performance results, team feedback, and a high level of your delivery approach. Showcase your presentation to your own manager first, and ask them for an opportunity to share your results with other teams, departments, or the rest of the organization. No manager will say no to make themselves look good across the organization. Some of these existing recurring meetings across the organization could be lunch and learns with other teams or department all-hands monthly meetings. Some of these meetings are longer than others and might have different audiences. Some audiences might be other project teams, others might be middle and higher management. One recommendation I have is to have 2 versions of your presentation. One version should be 5 minutes or less, covering a high-level summary of your performance results and the delivery method used. The audience for this version of the presentation is the middle and higher management. They usually care about your results, but most of the time they don't want to get into the details of how you achieved them. So don't go into too much detail about the Kanban method. The other version of your presentation is for the project teams and other delivery leads. This presentation should be longer, usually about 30 minutes or less, in which you provide the same results, but go into the details and provide an overview of your Kanban method. Highlight how your delivery approach works and how you achieved your results. Sixth, at the end of both presentations, you should offer to help other teams and consult them on how they can go about implementing the same method as well. The idea here is that once you prove you have a blueprint of delivery that was proven to bring better results, you can assist other teams across the organization to do the same. This will position you as an expert across the organization, and people will start reaching out to you for help. Most of the time at the end of this journey, people get promoted as well. Good luck with your journey. Thank you for taking our class.